In 2005, a nurse in northern Germany was caught in the act. A colleague watched him inject a patient with a drug the patient had never been prescribed, a drug that stops the heart. His name was Niels Högel. By the time anyone actually stopped him, he had murdered at least 85 people, 85 confirmed victims. That makes him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. But here's the part that should disturb you. The system had years and multiple documented chances to stop him, and at almost every one of them, it protected itself instead of the patients. This is the story of how hospitals fail, not through rare, unforeseeable tragedies, but through the same reflex, repeating decade after decade. When patient safety collides with an institution's reputation, the institution almost always wins. First, the scale. And here you have to be honest, because the honesty is part of the story. Exactly how many patients die from preventable medical harm is fiercely debated. A widely cited 2016 analysis in the British Medical Journal led by Johns Hopkins surgeon Martin Macquarie extrapolated that medical error could be the third leading cause of death in the United States, more than 250,000 deaths a year. That number made headlines around the world. It also drew sharp criticism. Other researchers, using tighter definitions, have put the figure closer to 22,000 to 26,000 preventable deaths a year, an order of magnitude lower. The truth is that nobody knows the exact number, and that uncertainty is the point. A system that doesn't measure its own harm can't be held accountable for it. What isn't in dispute is that the toll is large and that the World Health Organization treats unsafe care as a global crisis, serious enough to build an entire decade-long safety plan around. So go back to Högel, because his case holds the whole pattern in miniature. He worked at two hospitals, first in Oldenburg, then in nearby Delmenhorst. When that colleague saw him inject a patient with an unauthorized heart drug in 2005, management was told, and for 2 days, nothing happened. In that window, he killed again. But the deeper failure came earlier. When Högel left Oldenburg, the hospital gave him a clean reference. No warning, no flag, nothing. That single piece of paper let him walk straight into Delmenhorst and keep killing. Oldenburg's own police chief later put it bluntly. The murders could have been prevented because people at the first clinic already knew something was wrong. They just didn't stop it. Now shift to England, 1991. Over just 3 months, a nurse named Beverly Allitt murdered 4 children and tried to kill 3 more on her ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. She was convicted in 1993. Her case became a reference point for what clinicians call factitious disorder imposed on another, harming someone in your care to draw attention or sympathy. But the official inquiry found something more mundane and more damning than any psychological profile. The ward was dangerously understaffed. The number of qualified children's nurses on duty sat well below the recommended standard. Understaffing didn't just hand her the opportunity, it created invisibility. Nobody was watching closely enough to see the pattern forming. Then there's Harold Shipman, and here the numbers stop sounding like statistics. Shipman was a trusted British family doctor. In 2000, he was convicted of murdering 15 of his patients. Investigators came to suspect the real total was around 215, possibly 250, spread across decades. Sit with that, a single doctor operating in plain sight for years, and the system never caught him. The people who finally did weren't regulators, and they weren't hospital administrators. They were grieving families who noticed too many of his patients dying, and a solicitor who spotted a forged will. The public inquiry that followed, led by Dame Janet Smith, ran for 5 years and rewrote how deaths are certified across the entire United Kingdom. The American mirror of Shipman is Charles Cullen, a nurse who worked across roughly 10 hospitals in New Jersey and Pennsylvania over a 16-year career. Cullen confessed to killing 29 patients. Investigators believe the real number could run far higher, and his case is the European pattern transplanted across an ocean. Hospital after hospital either missed the warning signs or quietly let him move on rather than report him. Each one chose to protect its own liability over the safety of whoever hired him next. If institutional cover-ups like this are exactly what you want taken apart every week, subscribe now, because the next case in this file is the one experts are still openly fighting about right now. Between 2015 and 2016 at the Countess of Chester Hospital in England, neonatal nurse Lucy Letby was accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 more. In 2023, she was convicted. A retrial in 2024 added a further count, and she is serving 15 whole life orders. And here I have to be precise, because this case is not closed the way the others are. Letby's convictions currently stand, but they are under active review by the Criminal Cases Review Commission after a panel of 14 neonatologists and pediatricians publicly concluded that they found no medical evidence the babies were deliberately harmed. That review hasn't overturned anything. No court has reopened the case, but it means the safety of the conviction is genuinely contested by serious experts, and an honest account has to say so out loud. What is not contested is the institutional story around it. Doctors on that unit raised concerns about the rising number of deaths repeatedly, and the hospital's leadership was slow to act on them. Whatever the courts ultimately decide about Letby herself, the failure to respond when clinicians sound an alarm is its own documented problem. And as you'll see, it's the part that has now put other people in handcuffs. Now, a different kind of failure. Not a killer, but a cover-up. In 2017, at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, nurse Redonda Vaught made a fatal medication error. She gave a patient the wrong drug, and the patient, Charlene Murphy, died. That was a genuine tragedy. What the hospital did next turned it into a scandal. Vanderbilt didn't report the error to regulators as it was required to. It told the medical examiner the patient had died of natural causes. It quietly settled with the family. And when the truth surfaced anyway, it was Vaught, not the institution, who was criminally prosecuted and in 2022 convicted of criminally negligent homicide. Hers wasn't the first criminal case against a healthcare worker for a medical error, but it became one of the most closely watched in the country, precisely because of what it signaled. A nurse who makes an honest mistake can face prison, while the institution that hid the death faces far less. There are 2 ideas patient safety researchers use to explain why this keeps happening. The first is the Swiss cheese model from psychologist James Reason. No single person causes a disaster. Catastrophe happens when the holes in several layers of defense line up at exactly the same moment. The second is just culture. The principle that punishing honest mistakes doesn't prevent them, it just drives them underground. And that's the trap. When institutions cover up errors, learning stops. When individuals are prosecuted for honest ones, everyone around them stops reporting. Both roads lead to the same place: more dead patients and less information about how they actually died. And the conditions that let killers hide are the same ones grinding down everyone else. A 2023 CDC report found that between 2018 and 2022, harassment of health workers more than doubled. The share reporting burnout climbed from 32% to 46%. Workers who'd been harassed were 5 times as likely to report anxiety, 3 times as likely to report depression, and nearly 6 times as likely to report burnout. Exhausted, understaffed, and afraid to speak up. That is exactly the environment in which the next Högel goes unnoticed. And if all of that sounds like history, it isn't. In November 2025, a German court sentenced a palliative care nurse to life in prison for murdering 10 patients and attempting to murder 27 more at a hospital near Aachen. His motive, prosecutors said, was almost mundane. He injected mostly elderly patients with lethal doses of sedatives to cut down his own workload on night shifts. The hospital only grew suspicious when the number of deaths dropped sharply while he was away on holiday. Once again, the gaps in monitoring were exposed only after the bodies. So what actually changes after each of these? On paper, a lot. In 2024, America's Justice Department launched a new program to reward corporate whistleblowers. Inquiries published their recommendations, and yet nurses today still strike over the very same understaffing and safety concerns that the Beverly Allitt inquiry flagged back in 1993. More than 30 years apart, the identical complaint. The reforms arrive. The pattern outlives them. But there's one sign that something might finally be shifting, and it's the most recent turn in the Countess of Chester story. After Letby's conviction, Cheshire police didn't stop at the nurse. They opened a separate criminal investigation into the hospital's leadership itself, first for corporate manslaughter, and then, as it widened in 2025, for gross negligence manslaughter. In the middle of 2025, 3 former senior leaders who ran that hospital during the deaths were arrested. In 2026, one of them was arrested again. For once, the investigation didn't end at the individual standing at the bedside. It reached the people in the offices, the ones who, prosecutors will now try to prove, may have chosen the institution over the patients. Whether those cases succeed or not, the precedent itself is new. The reflex to protect the institution is at last being treated as something that might be a crime in its own right. Every case in this file was preventable, not with better technology, not with smarter detection, with the oldest tool in all of medicine, listening when someone says something is wrong. The open question the Chester arrests leave behind is whether that lesson finally has teeth, or whether it's just the next recommendation waiting to be filed and forgotten like all the others. Next time, we're taking a single one of these cases apart, end to end. The doctor who signed 15 death certificates that nobody questioned, and how the paperwork of murder stayed invisible for decades. Subscribe so you see it the moment it's out. The case files drop every week.